Planning Commission review session of November 27th, 2017, and a quorum is present. Item number 1 for certification is the Willow Avenue rezoning, a 8-story mixed-use building with 126 affordable housing units and ground floor commercial use. James Rather, the Bronx office, will present the project.
And actually, I might just note for the record, one, I want to thank the commissioners for all of your good wishes, and I am very, very grateful to our vice chair for agreeing to chair this session.
I had no choice.
That's why
Mr. Rather, proceed.
Okay. Afternoon, Commissioners. The project before you is the Willow Avenue rezoning, located in the Port Morris neighborhood of Bronx Community District 1. The Altmar Group and JCal Development are the applicants for this project, and the proposed project would include an 8-story mixed-use building with 126 affordable units, including 32 MIH units. Also, 15,000 square feet of commercial space proposed for the ground floor. And the actions before you would facilitate the project by extending the adjacent MX1 special mixed-use district to encompass the project area. So here's a view of the surrounding area with Port Morris. You can see Randall's Island on the lower side of the frame, Harlem River on the left-hand side. The project site is depicted in yellow here. As you can see, it's just outside of the Port Morris IBZ, which is in the fuchsia color here. Also, the MX1 district that I had mentioned is just adjacent to the site as well and extends just up to the site here. You can see how the MX1 extends all the way to the west, and then you have the special Harlem River Waterfront District here. Some sites of notes in the area that I had called out include the Harlem River Yard site, Fresh Direct site, Nitsch's Millbrook houses here, and then teal dots showing some of the recent uses that have moved into the area, including the Port Morris Distillery and Silver Cup Studios. The yellow dash line here shows the pathway to the Randall's Island Connector, which provides pedestrian and bicycle access to more than 400 acres of open space. So here's a view of the immediate area surrounding the site. The site is bounded by East 134th Street to the north, East 133rd to the south, Willow Avenue to the west, and then Willow Avenue to the east and Cypress Avenue to the west. East 134th is a wide street, and the others are narrow streets. Just to walk you through the image, so the rezoning area is this L-shaped area here, delineated by that pink dotted line. It includes 2 assemblages, one that includes the project site here in yellow, and then a second site to be rezoned here that fronts on East 134th Street. The project site currently contains a 3-story commercial office building, a 1-story warehouse, and a surface parking lot with a small outbuilding. And the additional site includes a warehouse building, as you can see here. So immediately north of the site on East 134th, you have light industrial uses that include metalworking, storage, and an auction house. To the east here, you have a 6-story commercial laundry building just opposite the site on Willow Avenue. Farther to the east, you have the Northeast Corridor rail line, you can see here. The Port Morris Distillery, one of the recent uses that I had mentioned, is just over here on Willow Avenue and East 133rd Street. To the south of the site, you have a plumbing and heating supply business over here, as well as an electric supply business. And farther south here, there's a city sanitation garage. So to the west, you have the bulk of the subject block here, which includes 2- and 3-story wood frame buildings in the mid-block and farther west. The feel is really very residential as you head down the street in this direction. As you walk further down, you hit the nearest open space, which is Playground 134, as well as a charter school, roughly 5 minutes walking distance from the site. And transit access is also available via the 6 train at Cypress Avenue, which is off the frame here. Again, only a few minutes walk, as well as the BX7 and BX33 buses. So here are some photos of the area as it exists currently. You have the existing office building visible here and here. There is a portion of the site over here with a mural that was done by the folks who worked with the applicant. It was a temporary mural that was installed there that was done with the understanding that it wouldn't be permanent. You have the commercial laundry building visible here that I had mentioned. Next slide. So again, the commercial laundry building. So this view is sort of facing to the northeast. You can see some of the residential uses visible here. This faces to the west, and you can again see some of the residential character here. And then you have a view to the south here with the adjacent plumbing and heating supply business to the south, and the northeast corridor visible in the distance. So here again, more views of the subject block, residential building here, recently completed building located here, 4-story residential building, and then more residential uses here. So here we have the land uses in the vicinity of the site. The rezoning area is currently zoned M12 and R6A M12, but the majority of the rezoning area is M12. The M12 extends to the east, to the northeast corridor rail line, to the north at East 140th, and to the south at East 132nd. You can see again how I had mentioned the residential uses on the block are visible here in yellow. You can see kind of how the character of the block does differ from the area and the IBZ that surrounds it. So a little background, the subject block was rezoned, with the exception of the area here, was rezoned to MX1 as part of the 2005 Brooklyn Boulevard Port Morris rezoning. Excluded the project area because at that time there had been some industrial uses located still on the site. This area is changing. There have been new residential developments in the area, especially as farther to the west within the MX. Several loft conversions, as well as the new uses that I had mentioned, such as the distillery and Silver Cup. So here we have a rendering of the proposed building. As you can see, it's 8 stories in height. It steps down as you go from Willow Avenue westward, so it steps to 7 into 6 stories. Would include 126 affordable units on floors 2 through 8, including 32 MIH option 1 units. The proposed bedroom mix is 19 studio apartments, 66 one-bedroom apartments, 22 two-bedroom apartments, and 19 three-bedroom apartments. The applicant is also in discussion with HPD regarding their mixed middle income program. They've started at Bronx, and I should note that the local median income is $38,834. Proposed amenities would include a fitness room, a multi-purpose room, and a tenant accessible landscape roof, which is accessible on multiple floors. As you can see, it steps down and it is accessible in multiple locations. There are roof-mounted solar panels proposed as well. So the ground floor would include 15,125 square feet of commercial space. Several uses are being contemplated, including a restaurant and a bike shop. One of the potential uses is a local draft house. So there are different things being discussed. In addition, there are 26 accessory residential parking spaces proposed below grade that would be accessible on East 133rd, as well as 63 bike parking spaces and a bike repair room that would also be usable by folks here, considering the proximity to the Greenway and Randall's Island connector. So here we have the zoning change map. You can see here how the MX1 extends just up to the rezoning area, encompasses the entirety of the block otherwise. The majority of the site, again, is M12. So there's a portion here that it has a split lot condition within lots 40 and lot 60 that falls within both the MX1 as well as the M12. The M12 does allow for up to 2.0 FAR in use groups 4 through 14 and 16 and 17. Under the proposed rezoning, the MX1 will be extended to encompass the remainder of the subject block. The portion on which the proposed project is located here would be rezoned to R70 M14, and then that additional area that I had mentioned with the warehouse here would be R6A M12. The MX1 would allow the manufacturing uses to continue while allowing new uses as well that reflect the changing character of the area. The R70 M14 would allow up to a 5.6 total FAR, and the proposed project would utilize all of that, maxing it out with 115,000 square feet of development. The R6A M12 for the additional site would be up to a 3.6 total FAR with MIH. So the proposed text amendment would would amend ZR 12363 in order to allow the extension of the MX1 district to encompass the project area. There's also, of course, for MIH, an amendment to Appendix F. I should mention that the tentative AMI breakdown for the 126 affordable units is for 25% of the units to be targeted at 60% of AMI, 30% at between 80 to 100% of AMI, and 45% at up to 130% of AMI. Again, these are to be finalized. So here's a pedestrian eye view, kind of across Willow Avenue, looking to the southwest, the ground floor visible. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple, and then I'll see to my colleagues. With regard to the existing commercial building that's there, or commercial buildings, and I guess there's also warehouse space there?
Right, on on a portion of the site.
Do you know how many jobs there are currently, and whether or not there are any relocation efforts underway to try to maintain those jobs, albeit elsewhere?
So there's 37 jobs located on the site. A number of those are associated with the applicant, that they use it for office space for their staff. As far as the relocation efforts, I can certainly look into it.
37 jobs,
That's
and
right.
you say a majority of them are?
Are for the applicant, actually, their own staff.
Okay. Secondly, this building looks very much like an industrial building. And I'm just wondering, is this a, well, it's obviously not a massing study, it's a proposed design, but is this the final outcome?
So
of
I
that
have
process?
included, just in the event that that question came up, another a nearby site that the applicant team has worked on Alexander Avenue. I'll show you. So you can see with how that came out. So it does present a little bit of a different appearance than the rendering. You can see kind of what they're going for.
So you're saying that they're looking to replicate that on a
Well,
larger scale?
this is an idea, right, of the sort of feel.
Okay, we'll start with Commissioner De La Uz and work our way that way.
Hi. I'm just wondering, considering the requested change in use, if you're aware of conversations that have been had with whoever runs the IBZ in the area, and early communication with the community board that could be shared, and if any of those discussions are reflected in the design or proposed plan?
Sure. So to the IBZ question, I can certainly look into. I do know that the applicant team did go before the community board on November 8th. So they did present the proposed project.
Any feedback from that worth sharing?
So there were different viewpoints. I mean, there's some concerns over the fact that it is a different use than what's there currently. Obviously, it'll be changing in as far as when it goes through ULURP and comes back, and it'll be changing. But there were varying viewpoints.
Okay.
Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. I have a few questions as well. Given its proximity to the IBZ, its exact proximity to the IBZ, I am just curious about any pressure that the IBZ may feel, and given that the MX is supposed to be kind of as I understood that when they first were proposed, a buffer for the industrial area to the residential area, and this building will no longer be the buffer on that block. It'll be a residential building. What would be the land use justification to go to an R7 rather than an R6A or D, R6A, since that too would trigger MIH?
Well, in terms of the uses that it would allow additional uses that you wouldn't necessarily get under the R6A M12. It does allow additional density, so additional affordable units. So I think those would be some of the reasons.
I'm just curious how many more additional affordable units there would be between the two. That's one set of questions, and I don't know if you want to address that or I should go to the next one. Well, the next question is
Sure.
really about the residential north of there and whether those are mostly single owner occupied buildings, or if there is some concern about displacement if in fact a more market rate combination MIH building goes up next door, or if those are, any of them are regulated units, or how much you know about the residential just to the north.
So there weren't any, as far as during environmental review, there weren't any displacement concerns that came up. So, and I can certainly look into it, though.
Okay.
And I would say I can't speak to the existing residential, but assumedly they are smaller homes on that block, but we have seen similar scale of residential in this area. And I would also add that this is proposed to be 100% affordable in an area where we have seen market rate development. So I think that's good to get that level of affordability in addition to mapping MIH in an area where we don't have those protections today.
But just speaking to the R6A versus the R7D, it's really a scale question too, right?
And I would say the building they're proposing is going up to 8 stories. And if you look at some of the surrounding scale, even on the industrial buildings that are across the street, the majority of which, one, we have a shelter, another large building that's actually across the street from it is owned by the applicant. It's one of the former padded wagon sites. And that's another building that they're looking to convert into office space. And it's of similar scale. I believe it's about 6 stories, 6 to 8 stories.
Is that one in the IBC?
That one is in the IBC.
Good. Commissioner Levin.
I'm interested in what this might do to the site within the project area that's not the developer's site, the one that's getting rezoned to the R6A, MX, whatever. to make it
Right, so the
R6A.
additional, the warehouse site.
Do we have a sense of how this permitted scale on that site will relate to the rest of the block and to this project? The rendering that you showed did show a stepping down
Sure.
to the northwest, I guess. Will it step down? Well, first off, are those step downs in the developer's proposal mandated by the zoning envelope or just the way they've designed it?
I think it was just the way that it was designed.
So whatever's going to go on could go on the rest of the block?
On the additional site,
Yeah, on the additional site, how would it be shaped?
so there was a massing study, of course, done for environmental review. I can certainly get additional information on it and come back.
I would also add that that site that you're speaking of, there's an existing single-story warehouse today. That is going to be R6A. So the R6A is being
That's the site I'm
pulled
talking
over,
about.
and then
Yeah.
it steps up.
Yeah.
So that'll be R6A with the underlying, with the MX as well. So that will continue, to be allowed
Yeah, no,
to
that's
operate,
exactly
but
what I'm asking about, and what might happen if what's the reasonable worst-case development scenario there if the warehouse isn't there? But I guess I can look at the EAS. Thank you.
Other questions? Aaliyah?
One more.
Commissioner De La Luz.
I'm just wondering, do we have a rendering that shows what's going on in that entrance, the kind of like the opening?
So the area along the ground floor,
Yeah,
go
it's
back.
kind of unique. So I think,
I'm sorry, so around here,
Yeah.
like where you enter,
Yeah.
it's something that shows more up close.
yeah,
You can talk to folks in the applicant team about it.
it could either be great or really bad, depending.
I'd add a rear view to that request as well. I'd like to see what the building looks like. Any other questions? And Mr. Rather, you can follow up with the information more precisely around the number of jobs and whether or not those that are not tied to the applicant.
Sure.
And whether or not there are relocation efforts underway. Commissioner Manin.
I think it also would be helpful to try and understand what's happening in the back of the building, because we want to, I think it would behoove us to see what the condition is as they abut the single-family homes on 133rd, and of course, that warehouse building that Anna was questioning.
So an additional viewpoint for the
Take a
rear.
look inside. I mean, is there open space plan for back there? What's the rear yard condition looking like? How does it relate to the existing structures behind it?
Sure, there is a courtyard that would face the portion of the rest of the block. I can talk with folks about providing additional visual that helps to,
That would help.
yeah.
Any other questions? This is certified.
Item number 2 on page 17 of your briefing package is the Jerome Avenue rezoning, returning for public hearing. Carol Samuel, the director of the Bronx office, will present the project.
Good afternoon. All right. Okay. Make sure I'm doing this right. It is with great pleasure that I stand before you today bringing Jerome Avenue neighborhood plan back for public hearing. After I present, we will be also have a presentation from Simon Kowitsky of HPD on the Jerome Avenue housing plan and associated. Just as a reminder, the plan itself is multifaceted and looks beyond housing or beyond zoning and land use to include housing, the community resources, schools, health of the community, the jobs and businesses, and particularly the auto-related businesses were very important to it, and preparing residents for careers, as well as getting around the neighborhood, having access to parks, transit itself, here we on this transit corridor, and of course zoning and land use that support the broader vision. The land use actions, just briefly, include a zoning text amendment, including the application of a special district, application of the mandatory inclusionary housing program, zoning map amendments, which we'll walk through in a little detail, and a city map amendment to create a park in High Bridge. And it is really the land use actions that are supporting the broader vision of the redevelopment of Jerome Avenue, really stitching together the community across the transit corridor, a very important transit corridor that many people use, but it needs to be enlivened and better integrated into the neighborhood itself, in neighborhoods, because it's multiple neighborhoods, making it walkable, green, safe, inviting, and thinking through the zoning about the buildings, what's happening on the streets, the uses. And here specifically responding to in specific conditions, whether it's the elevated train or the Cross Bronx Expressway, to bring safety, accessibility, people of all ages across the community, and a diverse economy to the area. And the land use changes will support that. It also responds to the cross streets that already vibrant commercial corridors that serve the local community. The plan itself, again, multifaceted and involved many agencies, HPD key among them, but also Office of Workforce Development, Department of Health, New York City Parks, environmental remediation, Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, with the largest West African population in the city here, small business services, and DOT, really bringing their expertise and knowledge and tools to Jerome Avenue and many communities around it. Just as a reminder, it's been 3 years that we've been engaged in this planning process, and Community Boards 4 and 5 invited us to come to the corridor. They wanted this planning work for many years. We saw this as an opportunity to bring consensus around some of the ideas for what should happen on the corridor, and they co-sponsored many of the events, and I think that was key. We had many events. This is on page 13 of your plan, which you should have. More than 40 public events where people could come and provide feedback, where we could get information from and opinions from people in the community, all throughout the community. Whether we were sharing information as we started out the process in March of 2015, and we also conducted a goal-setting and workshop where we focused on broad principles and broad goals for the planning process and asked the community to prioritize those. So they voted on them, and that's how we got the 5 central themes of the plan itself. Those are in the plan. And then we had a visioning session where we really brought those goals to the ground. How will this appear on the streets? What will it look like? We needed to land them. They identified everything from the density. Where should we have density? Which streets are important to us? Where should we have height? Where should we change uses? Where should we leave uses the same? We also did not just planning work, but also talking really about the technical, and we shared the planning and zoning framework shortly thereafter in November of 2015 to demonstrate how it really supports the vision. How does that get translated the vision get translated into zoning terms? We had an environmental review session to really get into the nitty-gritty of what is this technical document that you're all going to be conducting, and it will take significant time and effort for us. That was, I think, something that I think was a model that we should be doing more of. And we also took deeper dives into very specific locations. This is a very specific neighborhood plan, and we were diving into the Cross Bronx Expressway, a very important corridor in the entire region, but it disrupts these neighborhoods, and how could we think better about the public spaces that are around it? And we were out all summer, both summers, really gathering information, but also asking people to prioritize. What if you had a limited budget, what would you spend your dollars on? And it was fascinating to hear that whole process and get the feedback. Fresh food was the #1 goal people had in that process. But we were out all summer really talking to people. It culminated this past September. We had an open house after certification of the application, where we brought together all of the agencies to really present the whole and to continue to get feedback, but to present everything together, whether it's the parks and the open space, the streets, the zoning, health. Health, of course, has been an underlying theme throughout this process and throughout the plan. It weaves its way through many pieces of it. The zoning districts have been selected to really bring to life the vision for Jerome Avenue. It also creates distinct nodes of density for appropriate important locations, whether it's residential or commercial. And we also had the goal of leaving strategic areas zoned for existing uses, the auto uses primarily. Just to step back and think about the context of the area, you know, we're looking at the corridor itself, but the surrounding area, really Community Boards 4 and 5, was the planning area. And the greatest use there is residential. It's already a heavy residential area, 71% of walk-up apartments, elevator apartments, but also some lower scale homes near Bronx Community College here. The housing itself is highly regulated. 2/3 of the housing stock, you'll hear more about that from HPD and from Simon, is rent stabilized or some otherwise controlled. And in the past 14 years, we have built or preserved 15,000 units, 10,000 of those as preservation, meaning the people who live there today have improved units and longer affordability agreements, really meeting the people where they are. The rezoning area is starkly different. While, and I hope you all will go to the corridor, you know, auto uses feel most prevalent, but they're only about 15% of the uses. But it's low scale, it's commercial, but this is the transit hub. And this pattern was established 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago now, when the residential areas were built up and the subway went in. But we are thinking now toward the future now. How can we better utilize the land around our transit amenities? The zoning reflects that. I guess it's not animating. On the sides is R7, which is lower mid-density, and R8 around the concourse, higher density, and some R5, which is reflective of the smaller homes that are around the college. And then on the corridor itself is, C8, auto-related, and M1, light industrial. It prohibits residential uses, and it's predominantly kind of lower scale. The zoning does create some issues that we wanted to address in this. prohibits residential uses primarily, if you're thinking about the housing need. It does affect quality of life. We heard that consistently and throughout. The need to have the streets function for more than one sector to make them passable and walkable and have attractive streetscapes. It's very harsh. There are also commercial limitations around Burnside and Tremont Avenues, which are two very major commercial corridors, and thinking very long-term where we might want to see additional commercial uses. We have some odd lots that we'd like to be able to address. And of course, the elevated infrastructure, the rail infrastructure, needing to respond to that. If we're going to allow development closer to it, we need to be able to have a building that works for it. So quickly going over the zoning framework. First is to promote truly transit-oriented development around the stations. There are 6 stations. This is a long stretch. How can we support the neighborhoods by allowing that? And having density at the convergence of wide streets. Here, this is in the south, is Edward L. Grant, 170th Street, really important nodes here that could really create a place with the use change and the density. Of course, promoting opportunities along other major corridors, Burnside Avenue to the north, and then to the south also McCombs, 170th Street, Edward L. Grant. Expanding the commercial uses at Burnside and Tremont, we wanted a greater variety of uses, but we also wanted a greater density. Again, this is thinking about the college and other kind of anchor uses in the area. And promoting mid-density throughout, knitting the whole community together with mid-density, very much matching the character around it of lower scale, walkable. And retail continuity, we think that's very important along this spine. Not only because of the conditions that are created because you're under a train, you don't want housing necessarily on the ground floor there, but because it becomes the spine instead of just the cross streets. We wanted to maintain existing zoning at key locations. We've selected and identified 4 of those where there was a large number of auto uses and other industrial uses that could remain. But also importantly, was it would still allow us to achieve our other goals of housing production and community continuity here. And to create a special district and special rules along the elevated. We'll go through that in a little bit. So the land use actions, again, we have here the densest districts here in the south. I'm going to try this. R9, that can achieve up to 19 stories. R8s here and here, achieving up to 16 stories along the elevated train, 14 stories normally. And a small use of R7D, which can go up to 11 stories, 13 along the elevated. And then filling in with R7A, which can go 9 stories, 11 along the elevated. Some of these are actually just contextualizing the existing underlying residential zoning. Here, R8, R7, R8. So the special rules in the special district are for lots along the elevated. Here's an image of it. So you can really kind of see the lower base setback and then go up to your maximum building height. This is for a couple of reasons: light and air underneath the train, noise attenuation from the train, and then also to just make this a better quality building for residents inside. We have some irregularly shaped lots. This is here, you see how they come to an angle here. We wanted to make sure that if we instituted street wall requirements, that they were forgiving enough to allow buildings to be built efficiently. We have a hotel special permit, which is intended to really allow us to achieve our affordable housing goals and not compete with the affordable housing before the permit itself expires. And mandatory ground floor uses, again, under the elevated train to make sure that it stays walkable and that this space is, dedicated to uses that wouldn't mind being right directly underneath the elevated train. So community facility and commercial uses. We are making a change to the city map to demap a street, a mapped but unbuilt street, and take the street bed area and an adjacent city-owned parcel and creating Corporal Fisher Park, mapping that. It is on a very important location here in High Bridge on 170th Street, leading to the High Bridge, which if you haven't been, I highly recommend it. And this is a really important connection going down to the subway. So this is an important connector up to the High Bridge community itself. We've committed $4.6 million to build out this park. We've also committed to an additional park to the north near Aqueduct Park, Morton Playground. So here's what it looks like today. It's a smaller city-owned lot. And then in the future would be this very important connector. We've been through public review up until this point and received from Community Boards 4, Community Board 5, and Community Board 7 votes to approve with conditions. You have the full conditions in your packets. We also, just this morning, received approval from the Bronx Borough Board and the Bronx Borough President with conditions. Which we'll have sometime today and share. Just to kind of summarize, Community Boards 4, 5, and 7, they did coordinate and have some very similar recommendations. And the full recommendation is in your packages. And I would say their conditions really reflect the plan. There's nothing that's incongruous there. It focused on tenants and housing, auto workers and auto uses, making them better neighbors, parks and schools. Schools is a very important issue. And implementation. They also asked that we rezone the entire corridor, which I suspect that as we deliberate, or as you deliberate, that we'll have a lot of conversation about that proposal. And I think just to kind of go back to the plan so you can kind of see where their recommendations fit within, we released a draft plan in October. You should have received a copy of it. Okay, good. That really goes through all of the recommendations. It's available online. And the strategies that the different agencies are bringing to the table that are central to the plan. Just to go kind of quickly through some of them and to talk a little bit about the progress that we've made in implementing as we go make our way through ULURP as well. Housing, I'll leave that to Simon. I won't steal any of his thunder because we've got some really good news in housing. And key among it is preservation and tenant resources. I think also equally important is the economic and workforce development. So the goals themselves were arranged around the retail diversity and the retail corridors, but entrepreneurs and small businesses overall, training and skills development for the people who live here, and support for the auto-related businesses and workers. Those were the pillars. And we've made progress here. I would start with the network. This diagram is intended to be the network, but it truly is really important that we have Jobs First, which is a citywide organization, has committed to working in the South Bronx and particularly in Jerome to help the local CBOs form a network of workforce referral and whatever it might grow into, health referral, housing referral, whatever it might grow into, the CBOs themselves will decide. I say, we have some very strong CBOs here. We have Bronx Community College, which is at the table with us. And the network is the missing link. And this will, I think, be a very important addition. It was a request of the community boards, all three, at least two of them, and the Jerome Coalition. So we feel like this is a big win. And I suspect you'll hear from Jobs First on Wednesday at the hearing. Secondly, the Commercial District Needs Assessment was conducted with funding from SBS by WEDCO and Davidson Community Center. I suspect you'll hear from both of those. The city awarded nearly $1 million to those two organizations to actually bring in and implement the recommendations of the assessment. Whether that is mom and pop shops, promoting them, or helping the actual physical space of the retail corridors, or organizing the merchants, or creating events. There's a full range of recommendations that they're bringing to the table. And then also bringing services to Jerome. Business services, bringing the SBS van regularly to the corridor, where we can connect businesses to low-interest loans or free legal service to negotiate a lease, but doing it on Jerome and making sure that they have a presence and they know the resources that are available to them. Health is always an underlying or overarching, like overarching better, theme, and was really truly a guide for us, whether it is to have access to secure quality housing, jobs and employment have health impacts, actual access to health care, safety, green spaces, and mobility. All of these things are imbued with health and the goal of health. We will apply the FRESH program is applicable here, and as we see new construction coming online, promoting the development of grocery stores where appropriate. Schools, we had, of course, we're continuing to work with property owners along the corridor to identify new sites as they come available for school construction. We also were able to cite almost 400 seats in Community School District 10 to the north. Important. And then I like to use Corporal Fisher Park, the block of Corporal Fisher Park, as kind of the embodiment of it all, because not only are we creating a park, but around the block, on the same block, we've committed to developing senior housing on a city-owned parcel there in High Bridge. All of those things very, very needed in High Bridge. And parks and open space, transportation, also key elements, whether it's access to the parks themselves, improving the parks themselves, but also the space under the elevated train, absolutely critical to the success of Jerome as a residential and commercial corridor. So the city is committed to pilot Under the L, which is a new street furniture, specially designed with DOT for spaces under the elevated train. And we're going to pilot it on Burnside Avenue. It includes seating, lighting, and communications, signage, notifications, and see what that looks like, and then can expand as we go. So that's a very important commitment. It'll also be with other amenities like lighting and seating and so forth. Throughout the process, we heard consistent comments and requests from the community boards as well as private property owners and other to expand the rezoning area to include certain parcels, but also we wanted to amend the application to include permitted second-story retail along Jerome Avenue, so that whole space underneath can be flexible for retail. To permit physical cultural establishments, gyms, as a right, so they don't have to go for a special permit. And provide design flexibility on, just like we're doing to the south on some oddly shaped lots, for a site to the north in Community Board 5. And then adding several spaces to the rezoning area. So just to walk through them, here in the north, this is north of the Cross Bronx. This R7D along Davidson Avenue at 176th Street. There are 2 city-owned parcels there. We haven't made any decisions about what should happen with those parcels, but in the event that we would do housing, we wanted to have appropriate zoning in place. And to the south, along Featherbed Lane and McCombs Road, adding another parcel. This would add services for the underserved, controls a very large old hospital campus there, and they are ready to redevelop it. And they want to put housing, nearly 400 units of housing, including a community center and some open space. It's a gem of a project, not to be testifying, but you will hear from them on Wednesday. And I think this is the kind of thing that, that Jerome has been dreaming of. But I think it's a very important addition. And to the south, we've heard from two property owners who have a history of housing development, affordable housing development. So here along Cromwell and Inwood, there's a school. They want to expand the school, and then there's a vacant building, a hut, really. You know, if we just extended the zoning here, it would allow him to provide affordable housing. And then this entire block opposite this precinct, they've joined together and would like to redevelop with housing, and as well as community facility space. There's only in these expansion areas, there's only one auto use, and it's on this block, and it's owner occupied. So that's just my overview of where we're at in the process. And I'm going to turn it over now to Simon Kowitsky.
Well, Carol, before you do the handoff, maybe we should take questions from...
We can do both, yeah.
To the extent that there is any. I also want to note the presence of Councilwoman Vanessa Gibson, who is here. Any questions for Carol?
I can come back to.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for having me here today. My name's Simon Kowitsky. I'm an Assistant Commissioner at HPD in the Office of Neighborhood Strategies, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time today just giving you an overview of the work we've been doing in the Jerome area. A little less than 2 weeks ago, the city released can you guys hear me? Is this okay? The city released an update to Housing New York called 2.0, very creatively, that lays out a strategy to build and preserve 300,000 affordable homes, up from 200,000 by 2026. It also includes new programs and initiatives in response to lessons learned over the past 4 years. A lot of our work in Jerome has actually informed these strategies, and I'll talk a little bit about those as well as we go along. Here is the progress we've made to date since 2014. Citywide, we've already created or preserved more than 77,000 affordable apartments. About 80% of all homes are affordable to low-income families, and over a third are serving those making less than $43,000. Over the past several years, HPD has been closely involved in the Jerome neighborhood planning process, and similar to what you've seen in East New York and East Harlem, we developed and are continuing to refine a housing strategy. So as you may know, the Jerome area has one of the highest concentrations of rent-regulated housing. About 65% of all apartments here are regulated by a government agency, compared to just about 1/3 of all homes across the city. And this picture of the neighborhood is due in part to the large role HPD has historically played in the area. In a little over a decade, we've financed the construction or preservation of more than 16,000 affordable apartments in community districts 4 and 5, which is what we use as the general context area for this study. And on top of these investments, HPD and NYCHA are supporting about 13,500 families each year with rental subsidy vouchers. However, as our city and our neighborhoods are growing, we all know that rents are increasing. Between 2002 and 2014, rents in the Jerome area increased more or less on par with what we were seeing in the rest of the city, while the area remained predominantly low income. And as a result, and despite the intense level of resources the city has provided to stabilize buildings and provide rental subsidies, about 2/3 of all households are still paying a disproportionate share of their income towards rent. So again, this is the same approach you've seen us take in East Harlem, but we've tailored our strategy to the needs of the Jerome area. First and foremost, as always, we want to preserve what's already here and keep people in their homes. But we also need to ensure we are creating opportunities for the development of new affordable housing in order to keep pace with our growing population. And then lastly, we're continuing to make improvements to the way that we do business to ensure residents are better able to access and benefit from the resources and investments we're creating. Preservation. So while a large proportion of the homes in the area are rent regulated, we are continuing to offer, of course, loans to property owners who can make repairs and improvements to their buildings in exchange for maintaining affordability for existing residents. Under Housing New York, we've already financed the preservation of 5,500 affordable apartments in this area, and that represents about $870 million of public and private investment. 1 in 10 apartments we preserve across the city are actually located in these 2 community districts, and we have more in our pipeline as well. One new program we announced as part of the housing plan update that has relevance for Jerome is called Neighborhood Pillars. This is a new initiative that will provide dedicated source of funding for nonprofit organizations to acquire and rehab rent-stabilized buildings. We're also, as you know, continuing to pilot new tactics to reach building owners who have not traditionally worked with a government agency or are unfamiliar with the help that we can provide. So, for example, we've contacted already over 1,800 owners in the area through direct mailers and phone calls. More recently, we hosted a clinic at the Apple Bank branch on 170th Street to provide one-on-one technical assistance to owners. We had reps from HPD's finance and code enforcement teams on hand, as well as DOB, DEP, and DOF to help troubleshoot and introduce our loan products and how we can help. We also recently launched a program called Landlord Ambassadors in this part of the Bronx, and here we've contracted with the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition to do outreach and provide that more hands-on technical assistance to owners that could benefit from our resources, and really trying to get them to work through our process and submit loan applications being the end result. Finally, homeowners have also been a big focus. We've hosted 2 homeowner fairs in the area to date, and that together have attracted about 275 people. And we work closely with the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, as always, to provide foreclosure counseling. As part of the housing plan update, again, we are also on a new announcement. We're revamping our small home loan repair programs so that low and moderate income homeowners can have access to funds that they need to make repairs and stay in their homes, whether for their unit or if they have tenants living above in units as well. HPD continues to improve housing quality through enforcement of the Housing Maintenance Code. Since 2014, we've increased the number of inspections in the Jerome area by 11%, and the number of violations we've issued by 25%. Last fiscal year, HPD inspections in these 2 community districts accounted for more than 10% of all of our inspections citywide. We also spent more than $2 million to go in ourselves and make repairs in buildings where conditions were endangering the health and safety of residents. Lastly, Jerome is one of only 3 neighborhoods we've prioritized for the proactive surveying of distressed buildings. So using data and referrals from community groups like CASA in close coordination with them, our team has walked the neighborhood and so far surveyed 421 buildings. And as a result, a number of them have been referred on for further action. 15 went on to litigation and 6 were added to our alternative enforcement program. In addition to owner assistance and enforcement, the city's launched a number of important resources to provide tenants with the resources they need to prevent displacement and deregulation. The city, through HRA, as you know, is providing free legal representation to any tenant facing harassment or eviction in housing court, including through a new right to counsel commitment. In 2013, only 1 in 100 tenants had lawyers across the city, while as of April 2016, 1 in 4 tenants was represented. Citywide, during this period, evictions decreased by city marshals by 24%. In the Jerome area, the city is investing $9.6 million to serve approximately 4,000 households annually, and that funding secured through fiscal year 2021. The tenant support unit is also canvassing in this area. They go door to door in rent-stabilized buildings to inform tenants of their rights and report cases of disrepair or harassment to us. Since 2015, the unit has knocked on over 32,000 doors in these 2 districts and referred 3,000 tenants to free legal services. We also helped launch a tenant harassment prevention task force, which is investigating and bringing criminal enforcement actions, including criminal charges against some of the worst landlords that harass tenants. And then lastly, in response to growing interest here in Jerome and many communities across the city, the administration's been working with the City Council to introduce legislation that would pilot a certificate of no harassment program, and we're working to include community districts 4 and 5 in that as well. Shifting gears now to new construction. the city's proposed land use changes along the Jerome Avenue corridor could, over time, result in the creation of over 4,000 new apartments. And I'd like to speak a little bit about the resources we're providing through HPD and HDC to be responsive, to ensure we're being responsive to the needs and concerns of the community. First, the mandatory inclusionary housing program will require that any new development here, by law, dedicate 20 to 30% of all apartments as permanently affordable. The market in this area, we found, does not support large-scale development without gap financing from HPD, and we expect that developers will continue coming to us for subsidy. We've already financed the construction of over 1,700 affordable apartments in these two districts over the past few years, and we expect that trend to continue. So when developers do come to us, they'll have to meet our program requirements, and those far exceed the minimum requirements of the MIH program. This past summer, in response to concerns we heard in this and other communities, we updated our financing programs to require even more apartments are set aside for extremely and very low-income households, as well as for formerly homeless families. Since 2014, about 1/3 of all the new apartments we financed in this area are serving families already that make less than $26,000 for a family of 3. That's 30% of AMI. And we're also now requiring that any project we subsidize in an MIH area must set aside an additional 15% of all apartments as permanently affordable. So if you have an MIH requirement of 30% and they use our subsidy, you could see 45% of all units being permanently affordable under the similar mechanism. As part of Housing New York 2.0, we're also launching a new program to finance the construction of affordable condos and co-ops that are marketed towards first-time home buyers. This is something that has come up in many of our engagements with the community in Jerome. And as always, we're continuing to identify opportunities to develop affordable housing on underutilized publicly owned land. So, so far, we're moving forward to develop about 45 apartments on small sites that are scattered throughout the districts. We also recently received state approval to construct 50 affordable apartments on an unusable portion of Corporal Fisher Park. Goal 3 is about ensuring community members are able to access any new affordable housing that we bring online. Often we know the lottery process can be time-consuming and difficult to navigate, and we're continuing to take steps to refine the process and help residents become better prepared to submit complete and accurate applications. So our Housing Ambassadors program was set up to train local community groups to actually help residents one-on-one submit applications for the lottery. UNHP is our partner right now serving the Bronx. We have new step-by-step video and print guides that are being used to help in these with this assistance as well. And we're also working to remove barriers to qualifying for affordable housing. So we recently updated the rules that developers have to follow when they interview prospective tenants. These criteria do not allow a tenant to be rejected based on their credit score alone or the simple fact that they were taken to housing court by a landlord. Finally, we're working to ensure that any investments we make are in housing are leveraged to promote local economic development and growth. So, for example, we have new incentives now that require developers of our public sites to create local hiring outreach plans. And there are new citywide Hire NYC requirements, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So any project that receives $2 million or more in HPD subsidy must coordinate and post available construction jobs at the local Workforce One Center. Finally, we're continuing to expand opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses. We recently announced that going forward, any developer utilizing HPD subsidy will be required to set aside 1/4 of all the costs towards MWBE construction or professional service firms that are working on the project. And that brings me to the end. Tried to give a very high-level overview. There's a lot more detail in the housing plan itself. That's part of the Jerome plan. But we welcome your feedback, as always, on how we can better refine this approach moving forward. Thanks for your time, and I can take any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Simon or Carol? Commissioner De La Hoz.
Hi, Simon, how are you?
Hi, good.
I'm wondering, do you have, and I'm sure this is probably in the DEIS, but it'd be helpful if you happen to have the information handy. in terms of the estimated breakout for AMI, for new construction and preservation moving forward, how it breaks down in the various AMI levels. I know a lot of that is going to depend on, I guess, what level of response HPD gets from private owners for the subsidy. And I'm wondering if, like, what has the very recent past told us about private owners' willingness to engage with HPD beyond MIH?
Sure.
And how can we tweak that, especially for communities like this where we really need to reach even deeper levels of affordability and longer-term affordability?
So I have some stats on what we've done in recent past in these two community districts. So altogether, 95% of all the new construction and preservation are serving low-income families. 21% total are serving extremely low-income households, 30% AMI, and 23% are serving those making less than 50% of AMI. New construction, I mentioned about a third of all the units we financed under Housing New York are serving extremely low-income households. So that's actually a much higher proportion than we do across the city in general. And then preservation, similarly, these are, in preservation projects, we're typically rehabilitating properties where tenants are already living there, so we follow their incomes, but the incomes in buildings we preserved have been a little bit higher. Only about 17% are serving extremely low-income households in our preservation projects here.
Do you happen to have a breakout of those that have been done? How many were nonprofit versus for-profit owners? Because that's what's partly going to change moving forward, right?
Potentially. I can look into that for you. I don't have that with me today.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Thank you. Simon, I guess I have a question for you, or I'm not sure if this will be a question you both may want to address, but Simon, in your presentation, you spoke of recently approved, a recent approval to build 50 homes on Corporal Fisher Park. So I just want to understand how, okay, so I think you know where I'm going,
Sure.
so take it and go, run with it.
I would point you to my presentation on, don't go far. Okay. Let's see, Corporal Fisher Park. On page 34. So what he's referring to, it's not
Okay, got it.
clearly delineated. So the green is the park.
Yes.
Right? That's one thing. There's a space between the row of homes on Shakespeare and Nelson on 169th Street. That is also a city-owned parcel.
Okay.
And that, at one time, this whole thing was intended to be park, but senior housing the property was disposed of and senior housing was built. So it's, we're using the remainder of the city-owned parcel on 169th Street to also provide housing.
Okay, so it's not building
On the park.
on the
We had to alienate the
designated
parkland.
parkland.
We had to alienate the parkland and,
Understood.
yeah.
Okay, great.
And that would be developed through an RFP process.
Okay. And
Still very early days.
just a sort of general follow-up question, perhaps, Carol, for you, that in the community board, we'll call them the conditions, can I assume that some, if not all, of these conditions are somehow being addressed with this sort of interagency involvement? I mean, for example, just looking at the kinds of things through, for example, SBS in terms of
Right.
workforce
Right.
development. Are those things being addressed? Was the community not aware of it, or these are conditions they put in to ensure that they keep the pressure on to
I think it's
see them happen?
I mean, I think the recommendations and the conditions closely match the plan.
Right,
They
well-
were very much at the table in doing all that, and I
Right.
think they wanted to articulate what was important to them. I think so. It's a little bit of your latter point, which was, that it's reinforcing what they absolutely want to see
Okay. and-
happening here.
So I'll use just one particular example because I'm not sure if some of the funding that's coming is just capital related, but for example, the Parks Enforcement Police request and the idea that parks are and public spaces are a big part of this recommendation, which I certainly understand and support and think is important for the building of new community. What is some of the money that's coming as part of the rezoning, can it be used for those purposes? Will there be a process to allocate it that way, or is that, it's just capital and infrastructure and not expense?
I appreciate the question. I think it's a little of both. I think it depends upon where the need is. We have the Neighborhood Development Fund for additional capital, but also we'll have the agency capital budgets to work with. And then where we have programmatic needs, we will need to consider that. We have been in discussion with parks about what would this look like for you, you know, that kind of thing, to better understand. The marketing of services on Jerome is a commitment from the city that is a program related. It's not capital related. It's bringing services to Jerome.
Okay.
So it's, I think, a little bit of both.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Could I just,
Please.
Michelle, G just reminded me about something that we're planning to do that I think gets at your point a little bit. You know, we all know that we rely on private property owners to come to us with proposals. One of the things that we want to do here, and I think it'd be great to do in in other areas as well, is do a convening of property owners along the corridor so they understand how the rezoning impacts their ability to redevelop properties, which would, you know, we would do in coordination with the local elected officials. And can invite nonprofits and introduce some of the different things that we have to help connect owners that maybe don't understand development or haven't done it in the past with our networks.
And I would add that on Wednesday, I suspect you'll hear from both for-profit and nonprofit developers.
Carol, I just want to follow up on the job, on the workforce training. You may not know the answer to this, but I'd be interested in whether or not the workforce training envisioned is going to be sector-based and linking in some of the larger employers in the Bronx, starting with healthcare.
Very good.
Which is the single largest employment base in the Bronx.
Yes, 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 and yes. I think the healthcare providers are at the table. Montefiore, Bronx Lebanon Hospital, of course, located here in the corridor, you know, are at the table. Morris Heights Health Center. So healthcare is a growing sector. We want to plug into that, but then we also need to you know, let the CBOs kind of just figure out the direction for it. SBS would also like to work in technology, planning for that. Bronx Community Colleges offers an array of training programs. There's construction training in the area. So I think there's a good blend of things, but healthcare would absolutely be an important factor here, and training for it is and you'll hear from Bronx Lebanon. You should hopefully.
You're going to testify?
That we've asked them to, and we expect them to, yes.
Okay. Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. It's a really thoughtful plan, and the presentations were, at least for me, particularly enlightening. Part of the success of this will be determined by the use under the elevated, and a lot of that is retail, and in many cases, you're hoping for new retail. But there are a lot of vacancies within the retail currently. Well, there are some storefront vacancies,
yeah,
right?
Sure, absolutely.
And I'm just wondering if SBS will speak to any advantages they can give the existing vacant storefront owners, storefront improvement dollars or other things, so that it's not a double hardship on the existing landlords of smaller scale buildings as they contemplate a tougher time in retail.
Yeah.
I guess there's an assumption that the more retail will bring more retail, but I guess it really depends on the quality of what's there.
I would just note, there are vacancies, of course. I think there are on every corridor, but there is actually a very low vacancy rate along Jerome. I wanted to look up the figure here. It's 5% versus 8.5% in bids citywide. So it's smaller, lower then,
It would be so interesting to know where that's concentrated. I just think it might be able to help us if it's readily
Sure.
available.
Sure.
Not to create more work for this, since a lot of work clearly has been done. Thanks.
Other questions? Commissioner Ortiz?
Hi, and sort of building off of that question, and again, perhaps this is for SBS, so clarify for me that commercial overlay will be along the entirety of the court.
I'm sorry?
The commercial overlay.
Yes.
Is along the entirety of
Correct,
the court.
correct.
So, how much additional retail would that end up creating as a result? Do we have a sense?
Along the, I'd have to look that up. I'd have
Yeah.
to do the math there.
I'm curious because, we do a lot of analysis, of course. Simon, you said the market does not support large-scale development without gap financing, and the same holds for the ground floor space that we're creating along Jerome. And now this rezoning contemplates second floor space, which is also non-residential, the first 2 floors. And so, the degree to which someone can speak to whether we're creating a challenging situation by forcing uses for which we're unsure whether there's sufficient demand. I'd be interested if someone's done some thinking around that.
Well, I'll speak a little bit to the unmet demand in the area, that we know nearly $1 billion leaves this neighborhood every year.
It's a very big neighborhood, so what is
It
that?
is, it is. And we'll provide you with a breakdown of the goods and services.
It's in the CDNA, I know.
Yes, yes. And then we also conducted the CDNA to really drill down and understand what are the issues. And that's, I think, also SBS's response to both of your requests to how are we going to be able to market services and deliver services directly to the retailers on the corridor. But I'll ask SBS to speak more directly about that. And then I would also add, we're not requiring that it be retail. There are a lot of community facility uses that could fill those spaces as well, that we think is a good blend.
The same question holds for those uses. Is there sufficient demand? Are there enough users to fill the space that we anticipate and we're now requiring?
I'll share with you more detail on the leakage. We'll start with that. And then look at the amount that we think would actually come online, over time.
Yeah, I think that's important. Thank you.
Commissioner Marin?
Carol and Simon, thank you for your presentations. One thing that I haven't heard is that of school seats. And I know that there's an identification of a shortage of school seats. You mentioned there's some in 10, but in this immediate area, we do have a shortage of school seats and identification of a site, commitments to a school. Can you elaborate on that?
We're not yet have not yet zeroed in on a single site. We have been talking to 4 or 5 property owners about whether they would be interested in working with the school construction authority. We've met with the school construction authority with developers to help them understand what are the size constraints and needs of a school, whether their parcel would fit on it. So I think we're making progress to identify a location. I would note that finding a location is the most important thing we could do here, absent funding. We had funding in District 10 for a decade and no site, so we finally found a site to expand a school in District 10. So I think, pairing those two together, a site, it will be very important. But so we're continuing, and a lot of sites are unlocked with the rezoning and allow us to, have these kind of conversations.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner De La Ruz?
Since obviously the auto uses came up in both the community board's presentations, can you talk a little bit about, and specifically a fund for relocation that came up? I guess it would be helpful to know where the conversations are at with current owners on the auto uses. And then simply have a question for Simon about existing rent stabilized unit.
What I think we've committed to having a full discussion about, what areas should be preserved for auto uses. And I could imagine we'll come in a follow-up and have a real discussion of where would it make sense to leave C8 and M1 zoning, if that makes sense to you all. And understanding, I think understanding the industry better, and knowing that of the DMV licensed repair shops, 70, what is it, 77? No. 78% of them are outside the rezoning area. So in this area, there's a lot more auto going on outside than there is inside. It's hard to believe because the corridor feels so concentrated, but I just think it tells you how many auto uses there are around. So I think, we're thinking more about business needs and then also worker needs. And again, how that plays out in the workforce development network. I think that will be up to the CBOs to really push that and understand that. But I expect we'll have a full follow-on discussion about that.
So the question I have, Simon, so do we have a map of the areas that are proposed to be rezoned, and what are the properties, rent-stabilized properties that are within the zone that we can share?
Yes, I can provide a
they're
map.
excluded from the DEIS analysis, so it'd be helpful to know where they are.
Sure.
Okay, other questions? Okay, this is on for public hearing Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, we're gonna go a little bit out of order
Right.
and go to the New York, to the department's proposed rule changes. So we're gonna jump down to item number 6, the West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund proposed rule change. Annie White of the Manhattan office is here to tell us about it.
So, hello, good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm here with John Mangan from the Council's office to review the proposed rule to create a West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund pursuant to Section 93-262 of the zoning resolution. So, for a brief background, as part of the 2005 rezoning of West Chelsea, the Highline Transfer Corridor, defined here on the left in the red, was defined to allow owners of property under and near the High Line to transfer their floor area to receiving sites in designated subareas of the Special West Chelsea District. Those designated subareas that can be used as landing sites are shaded here in blue on the right. This provision was to ensure the protection and redevelopment of the High Line by allowing landowners to still gain value from their land and to preserve open space and view corridors from the High Line. In certain subareas throughout the Special West Chelsea District, the basic maximum floor area can be increased up to the maximum permitted floor area, either entirely through the Highline Transfer Corridor transfers or through a combination of a minimum required amount of Highline Transfer Corridor transfers and inclusionary housing. So also within the Special West Chelsea zoning, there are provisions that provide that where the chair of the City Planning Commission has determined that 90% of this floor area eligible for transfer in the Highline Transfer Corridor has been transferred, the chair shall allow, by certification, a contribution into the West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund in lieu of the Highline Transfer Corridor transfers. After this determination, transfers from the Highline Transfer Corridor are still allowed. So those private transactions can still occur, but the maximum permitted floor area on the landing site sub-areas can be achieved entirely through contributions into the Affordable Housing Fund with inclusionary housing where it's allowed. So on September 7th of this year, Chair Lago issued a determination that more than 90% of the floor area in the transfer corridor eligible for transfer has been transferred. And upon this determination, the Department of City Planning began working with HPD on a rulemaking process to establish this fund, which John will explain a bit more.
Thanks, Annie. Good afternoon, Commissioners. So as you'll recall, the proposed rule that will be subject to comment at the hearing on Wednesday will set the contribution rate to the West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund. The West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund was created by City Council through a modification to the Special West Chelsea District as approved by the Commission in 2005. Points of agreement from that time stipulates that the contribution rate for the West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund would be based on the value of Highline Transfer Corridor development rights. The department analyzed the price per square foot of all 19 non-$0 transactions over the last 5 years and found that the median price for these transactions was approximately $500 per square foot. The proposed rule sets the contribution rate at $500 per square foot of floor area increase. The fund will be administered by HPD to support the production and preservation of affordable housing within Community District 4 in Manhattan. And a representative from HPD will be here on Wednesday to answer any questions that the commission might have. I'm going to hand it back over to Annie to provide a little more background on how the $500 was arrived at.
John, before you do that, can I just ask a question?
Sure.
So I understand. When when a contribution is made to the fund, does that diminish proportionately the remaining transferable air rights in the balance? In other words, in that 10% balance, is that diminished in an amount equal to the funds that are contributed?
No, once the commission creates the West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund, there'll be two parallel mechanisms by which a receiving site would be able to increase floor area up to the maximum specified in the Special West Chelsea District. They could purchase remaining Highline Transfer Corridor TDRs from any sites that still have them within the Highline Transfer Corridor, or they can make a per square foot contribution to the West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund. But floor area obtained through a contribution to the West Chelsea Affordable Housing Fund would not diminish the amount of outstanding Highline Transfer Corridor TDRs.
Thank you.
So, right, as John said, we were just asked to give a bit more of an explanation onto the methodology that went behind the $500 per square foot amount. So the Department of City Planning did engage in a detailed analysis of all of the Highline Transfer Corridor transfers since the beginning or the initiation of the text in 2006. And this was based on the Department of Finance data that we pulled. And so although the price of the square foot of these transactions generally follows an increasing curve since 2006, there are a lot of outliers and the data is quite scattered. And even with the most recent transactions that everyone knows have been extremely high in West Chelsea, they jump between $1,000 a square foot down to $150 a square foot. So therefore, the Department of City Planning realized that we needed to look at a window of transfers that is wide enough to capture an honest snapshot of the market, while also being specific enough to more recent transfers as to reflect the extremely high market of floor area in West Chelsea. So we believe that this 5-year window was an appropriate representation of the market values, considering its fluctuation. While we did not exclude any of the outlying data, that we did have numbers for, we did remove any zero values for the data that were some of the transfers, as we determined that these were not arm's length transactions. So looking at this 5-year window, the median is how we determined the $500 square foot.
The rulemaking process is governed by the City Administrative Procedure Act, or CAPA. The proposed rule was published pursuant to commission assent on October 24th, and will come back to the commission for a hearing on Wednesday. Comments will be collected at the hearing and will remain open till the close of business on that day. Subsequent to the public hearing, the process will unfold as follows. Annie and I can return for as many post-hearing follow-ups as the commission needs. The commission is scheduled to vote on the proposed rule with any changes on January 3rd, 2018. If approved, the department would publish the final rule the following week, the week of January 9th, and then the rule would take effect 30 days after publication. So we're looking at a mid-February effective date. With that, Andy and I would be happy to answer any questions the commission has ahead of the hearing on Wednesday.
Okay, Commissioner Cerullo, and then Commissioner Efron, and then Commissioner Levin.
Just a procedural question. So, since the publication of the rule, and if I recall, under CAPA, comments can be written as well, right? So the public hearing, which is Wednesday, and then of course the vote is another month and a half from then. Have there been any written comments already provided that we might have the benefit of seeing in advance of really the only opportunity for us to communicate with the public on this?
I can say that proposed rules are published on the NYC Rules website.
Okay.
And members of the public can submit comments through the NYC Rules website. They can also email an agency designee, which I believe is me for this proposed rule. I haven't received any emails.
Okay.
We've received one comment through the NYC Rules website, which I can provide to the commission. Okay. Annie may have received others, but we're certainly aware of many people who plan to testify on Wednesday.
Right. Normally, this is the opportunity for people to come, but because written comments can be taken in advance, we don't have the same ability. Obviously, only one person has done it, it seems. So that kind of minimizes the concern somewhat. But it would be helpful so that we have a full sort of understanding of what the public is thinking as we consider this in the public forum. So, thank you.
I also haven't received any formal comments, but we're happy to share the one that John's received.
Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. I'm just curious about the rather wide range of $150 and up to $2,000, and I'm curious if there's an approximate number of transactions that took place that you can share, and whether or not there's any contemplation of an appraisal, only because the $150 per transfer square foot sounds like somebody is likely to have equity in a future deal, and that's not arm's length. So, I mean, are these small enough in number that they could be analyzed?
There was about 45 transfers in total that we looked at. We were also a bit shocked at the range, and without having too much information on these private transactions, it was a bit hard to determine each one what was going on. I mean, there could have been a situation where a seller was just really ready. Maybe he anticipated this 90% threshold was coming up and was just really ready to sell. So we haven't done a deeper analysis of actually what's going on with these private transactions. So we thought that would be a bit hard to determine. But like I said, we did remove the $0 transactions, as we knew that was, there was clearly those were not arm's length, but there also wasn't really any correlation between size of the transfers. So I did just plotted the total amount of square foot against the total amount of feet transferred versus the square foot amount to see maybe larger transfers had a lower cost, and those had no correlation either.
And we felt that we could eliminate with confidence the $0 transactions from the list we analyzed, but all other transactions, we were using Department of Finance data that the parties swore to as accurate. And so in the absence of additional evidence about the nature of those transactions, we felt we couldn't with confidence eliminate them from our analysis, that it would seem to be a form of cherry picking that in the absence of evidence we couldn't do.
I just want to state for the record, I wasn't implying that anyone was swearing to false statements at all. It was really just a question of how the transaction is documented and whether it lists the amount paid for transfer square foot, but doesn't ask whether somebody retains equity in the new entity. That's my only question. And it's really just in an effort not to leave money on the table for a really important housing fund.
Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, to that end, I wonder if it's, would be possible for us to see the written analysis that led you to the conclusion that $500 a foot was the right number. I mean, presumably it's based on Department of Finance information, which is public. And I would like to have a, broader view of what got you to that conclusion. I'm sure you had good reasons for getting there, but looking at the data leading up to it would be very helpful. And then on the scheduled commission vote date, is that, we're not on any kind of a Euler clock or anything here, are we? Or is that January 3rd date locked in?
No, it's not a ULERP clock. I believe that's the earliest commission meeting that the commission could vote at based on the CAPA timelines, but CAPA provides a minimum. I'm not aware of any maximum amount of time.
Because in fact, it may seem, January 3rd may seem a very long time away, but there's only one follow-up review session between now and then. And to the extent we need more time, not saying that we will, but
I'll look into that.
Good to know. Thank you.
Other questions?
I've got
Commissioner DeRose.
I just wonder if we considered, rather than being able to adjust the price by rule, more than once a year, whether or not we thought of doing it on a more automatic basis, reviewing transactions on a rolling basis.
Yes, we considered that, and I expect that we'll hear comments to that end on Wednesday, and so it's certainly something the commission could consider.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Thank you. This is on for public hearing.
We're going to go to item number 7, another rule change. This is for the department's new paperless filing system, and David Parrish is here to tell us about it.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm here with Dominic and Sweeney from our counsel's office. We're here to continue and talk about another proposed rule change, this to Title 62, the New York City rules, and concerning the method by which the department communicates with community boards, borough presidents, the city council, and receives applications from applicants. Today, those rules require paper-based communications. This rule change is about broadening that scope. And the reason why is because the department is beginning work on a paperless filing IT system, which will allow us to have electronic filing. So I'll briefly talk to you about the proposed system and what we intend to do with it. And I'll turn it over to Dominic and Sweeney to talk through the proposed rule change and the schedule for that proposed rule change. So first, the paperless filing system is intended to help the department manage and track all of the applications that we receive. So this is the internal component. Externally, we have 2 additional goals: to allow applicants to be able to file and pay fees online, and to allow the public, community boards, borough presidents, and the city council to have access to application documents and application data that are filed with the department. Today, that data is available to the general public, but not the actual applications themselves. All of this is intended to make the land use process more efficient and more transparent. The system, which is being designed in partnership with Vexcel and Microsoft Consulting Services, is a cloud-hosted IT system. It will, again, help us with project tracking, managing the many versions of documents that we receive for any given application, manage the different process workflows for different types of applications, both internally and in the post-cert or public review part of the process, enhance our metrics and reporting capabilities, and allow us to collaborate better with both applicants and the public on these applications. So there are a variety of benefits to all of our public-facing stakeholders, including the City Planning Commission itself. You'll have secure access to a place to review documents in draft form. Applicants, again, will be able to file and pay fees online, but will also have a general sense of where their project is in the overall process. Community boards, borough presidents, and city council will receive notifications when a project is available for their review. They'll be able to submit their recommendation on that project online. And as they will with the general public, they'll be able to see the actual application documents online, which today are mailed to them in hard copies. So there's obviously a limited number of people that can get their hands on those documents. The general public will also have access to detailed geographic searches to be able to find projects in their neighborhood more easily. With that, I'll turn it to Dominic about the rule.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So the rules of the City of New York in the category of city planning include rules for both the Commission and also the City Planning Department of City Planning, and are quite extensive with regards to how the application process works. The rules, however, offer a challenge to the implementation of paperless filing, and I'll explain that now. So 3 categories of proposed changes to the rules include, first, modification of the language of the rules, where the rules describe how applications are done and communication relating to those applications, mostly between city planning and applicants, and also between city planning and the community boards and the borough president's offices. Those changes make up the vast bulk of the proposed rule change. Secondly, references to the location of the Department of City Planning and where applications would be received needs to be changed. And thirdly, references to how fees are paid also needs to be modified. Our goal, however, is not to adjust the rules to require paperless filing, but to make the rules technologically neutral to allow paperless filing, so that whatever method and application, whatever method of communication is used or type of application, whether it be paperless filing or even another future method, the rules will be able to handle those changes. So here are just some examples. The top example is an example of how the communication would need to be modified with regards to how the land use process rules assume that paper will be used for applications. For example, section 1-02, which is a section that dealing with communications and petitions to the City Planning Commission, the language states that that all communications and petitions shall be delivered at or mailed to the calendar office and shall be in 17 copies. I mean, that language is very much in terms of paper, and moving to paperless filing system, we don't want petitioners to actually have to use paper. They can use a paperless filing system. The middle example is more of an example of fees. With this section, which has to do with seeker fees, it specifically states that the application shall include a fee in the form of a check or a money order. If an application is made paperless, you can't really attach the check or money order to a paperless filing. So we're going to be modifying sections such as that. And the last example is the example of what happens when the city planning rules state specific locations for filing applications. Here is an application that deals with how applicants deliver materials to the City Planning Commission. The rule currently states by hand delivery or first-class mail, but also it states 22 Reade Street. We will no longer, the commission will no longer be at 22 Reade Street, so that's another aspect of the rules that we're going to have to modify. So just like to talk a little bit about the CAPA process and the schedule. So today is November 27th, and this is the initial presentation to this commission. We're going to be publishing the city record probably not next week, but the following week, maybe around December 11th, which is a Monday. And there's a 30-day comment period, which will last from December 12th to approximately January 16th. We'll extend it a little bit because the public hearing would be scheduled for January 17th, where members of the public can come and give their testimony on this. Of course, as was just discussed with the West Chelsea rule change, there are other ways that the public can submit their comments, email to me or to the City of New York rules website. Then there'll be an interim review session on January 29th, where we can discuss with this commission comments received, any questions that you might have. Then the vote for the adoption of the rule will be scheduled for February 14th. Publication of the final rule will be in a few days on February 20th, and then again, approximately 30 days before a rule would go into effect. The CAP rules state that it's 30 days after the final publication in the city record. And I'll turn it back over to David.
So we just wanted to talk about the overall schedule and the different layers within it briefly. The paperless filing system will have two releases, an internal and an external. The internal component is expected to be done at the end of January, early February, and that's so our staff can get used to the overall system. The public portal will be built this spring to be released in May, June. The rulemaking process, we're hoping to complete that again by the end of the spring so that it is aligned before the public portal is up and running. And our current filing process will continue as it stands today with paper applications, paper checks, until June of next year, at which point we will begin accepting digital submissions through the paperless filing system. Again, the rules will not limit submissions to online systems, but we will seek to encourage applicants to use that. We are planning some outreach to community boards, borough presidents, and city council, letters to go out before the rule is published, and a session for community board district managers or land use chairs in early January during the comment period. And then we understand that training will be very important for community board and borough president staff as they go into looking at the new portal in the next spring and thinking through how they will use this to comment on applications. So with that, we will take your questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cerullo.
Thank you, guys. This obviously seems like a really wonderful step into the 21st century for everyone.
20th.
Right to the 18th
For the record.
Let me ask you a question, and I know it's not directly related, but there's a sort of related issue here. So the fees that the department charges are agency-driven, or are they created through a CAPA process as well?
They're created through a CAPA process as well, and they reside in the same rules.
And they reside in the same rules. So is there anything in these rules that modifies the fees, understanding, of course, that fees are established or can only be what it actually costs to administer the process?
Yeah.
Do we envision that fees might go down based upon this efficiency?
No.
I didn't think that was the answer, but I had to ask it.
No, yeah, so. Yeah.
Do we see that, do we think that there's more cost to this despite the efficiency based on the technology improvements that are necessary? Just trying to figure out if, one, there's anything in these rules that we're not seeing that involves fees.
Yeah.
And two, if not, what impact might this have on fees as we move forward?
So 2 points. One, in these rules, we are not proposing to modify fees in any way at this time. The department may seek to do so in the future. We've done some preliminary analysis along those lines, but we haven't come to any conclusions there.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Levin.
This sounds like such a way good thing. I just can't wait to forget the FTP ever existed. Of course, you guys probably feel that way too. It strikes me there are a number of other city agencies that also run public review processes, and in particular ones with which community boards and borough presidents have to interface. I'm thinking, Board of Standards and Appeals, Landmarks, Consumer Affairs. Have you all, in developing this system, have you coordinated with any of those other agencies? It would be super efficient, well, for one thing, designing these systems if they all work the same way, and also for implementation for those who have to engage with the systems. The more similar they are, I think the better it's going to be.
That's a great point. We've worked very closely with the Department of Info Tech Do It on our system, and we've had different levels of conversations with different agencies involved in the development process. We've had very thorough conversations with the Mayor's Office of Environmental Coordination. Obviously, they manage the seeker process, which city planning works with, the Department of Buildings, and we've had preliminary discussions with BSA and landmarks. So I think we are all looking toward similar technology with the idea that it would be able to, that the systems would be able to communicate with one another. And we all understand that much of our work passes to the Department of Buildings in the end, and they end up administering a lot of it. So that is very, very important to all of us. So we've had discussions about how do they receive those approvals, how do they understand what geographies they're tied to.
Other questions? All right, so this process proceeds, and we have a public hearing in January. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go back to item number 3 on page 121 of your packages. This is 45 Broad Street. This is a item for certification, a special permit for an increase in allowable floor area for subway improvements. Sarah Elmore of the Manhattan office will tell us about it.
All right, good afternoon, Commissioners. This is an application by Madison 45 Broad Development LLC for a special permit to provide a floor area bonus of up to 3 FAR, or approximately 71,000 square feet, for a proposed new mixed-use building at 45 Broad Street in connection with improvements to the Broad Street station of the Nassau JZ subway line and the Wall Street station of the Lexington Avenue 4-5 subway line. The project site is located within the historic and commercial core of the Special Lower Manhattan District of Manhattan Community District 1. It is located on a block bounded by Exchange Place to the north, Williams Street to the east, Beaver Street to the south, and Broad Street to the west. All of the bounding streets are part of the Landmarks Preservation Commission, or LPC, Landmarks Street Plan of New Amsterdam and Colonial New York. The project site and surrounding area are mapped within a C55 zoning district with permits a maximum base FAR of 15 for commercial or community facility uses, with a maximum base FAR of 10 for residential uses. The maximum base FAR may be increased up to a total of 18 FAR via as-of-right floor area bonuses for providing a public plaza or via special permits permitting the transfer of floor area from an individual landmark or providing floor area bonus for the provision of covered pedestrian spaces or subway improvement. The maximum residential FAR may be increased to 12 as-of-right by providing recreation space. The area surrounding the project site is predominantly characterized with high to mid-rise commercial and mixed-use buildings. The development site is located at 45 Broad Street, which is surrounded in red right here. And the project site includes the adjacent property, which forms the zoning lot of 41 Broad Street, and that's this blue one right here. The total lot area of the zoning lot is 23,797 square feet. The development site is vacant, while 45 Broad Street is improved with the 11-story Lehman Manhattan Preparatory School, which contains approximately 94,000 square feet of community facility floor area. The project site is located within a subway station improvement area adjacent to the Broad Street station. You can see the Broad Street station right here, and this is the zoning lot. And then, so it's the northern portion of the lot, which is adjacent to the southern portion of the station platform. And in addition, Broad Street Station is connected via an underground passageway to the Wall Street Station. The proposed building would be constructed on the development site with approximately 334,000 square feet of total floor area, of which approximately 60,000 square feet would be commercial floor area, and 275,000 square feet would be residential floor area. Following construction of the proposed building, the total floor area on the project site, including the 94,000 square foot existing building, would be 428,000, or approximately 428,000 square feet, for a total of 17.99 FAR. Of the total floor area on the project site, approximately 71,000 will be generated in connection with the proposed subway improvements. The proposed building would rise to a height of 80 stories, or approximately 1,115 feet, and the first 10 stories would contain the office use as well as the residential lobby, and at that point there would be a 15-foot setback would be provided. The residential floor area would be located above the 10th floor, resulting in 206 market rate dwelling units, and no parking would be provided. New York City Transit has identified the need for the construction of elevators to provide ADA-compliant access to the northbound and southbound platforms of the Broad Street Station. Out of 30 subway stations served by the J and Z trains, 5 currently provide handicap access in compliance with the American with Disabilities Act of 1990, including the Jamaica Center Parsons Archer Terminal Station, the Marcy Avenue Station in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and the Fulton Station in downtown Manhattan. The Broad Street Station does not currently provide ADA access, and no funds are allocated in the MTA's current 5-year capital plan to make any such improvements. In consultation with the New York City Transit and the Department of Transportation, the applicant identified the following areas as optimal locations for the proposed elevators. On the northbound platform, the proposed elevator would be located in a 4-foot wide curb bump out, which is located right here. And on the southbound platform, the proposed elevator would be located in a 12-foot wide curb bump out at the southwest corner of Exchange Place and Broad Street, which is right here. At street level, the proposed curb bump outs would consist of elevating and reusing portions of the existing street beds of Broad Street, which is paved with Belgian block and a granite curb, to maintain the appearance of the historic roadbed of Broad Street. In order to accommodate required turn radii for emergency vehicles, an existing bump out at the southeast corner of the intersection would be reduced in size by 2 feet 6 inches. The proposed elevator kiosks at street level would utilize a design previously approved for subway station elevators by the New York City Public Design Commission and would be located partially within the bump outs and partially on the existing sidewalk, leaving a minimum clear path with a width of 10 feet between the kiosks and the adjoining buildings. Because the proposed elevators and curb bump outs are within the landmark street of New Amsterdam and Colonial New York, LPC approval is required to locate the elevators within this proposed street bed. And this was approved by the LPC on August 30th, 2016. At platform level, in conjunction with the construction of the proposed elevators, the existing fare arrays will be reconfigured to facilitate better pedestrian flow to and from the northbound platform and from the southbound platform. In addition to the proposed elevators at the Broad Street Station, New York City Transit has identified the need for improvements to ingress and egress equipment at 2 control areas at the Wall Street Station, which is connected to the Broad Street Station. These control areas, identified as 4204A and 4204B, or R204B, have 7 high exit and entrance turnstiles, or heats, each of which allows for a maximum of 17 persons per minute to enter and 36 persons per minute to exit. In order to increase both ingress and egress and normal station functioning and emergency egress, New York City Transit had requested that each heat be replaced with one typical automatic fare control system. Each automatic fare control unit increases passenger movement to 27 persons per minute and 43 persons per minute to exit, reducing the time it takes for passengers to leave the station after discharging from the train. At the Wall Street Station, control area R204A, located at the northern portion of the southbound platform, which is right here, has 4 heats, accommodating 68 persons per minute entering and 144 persons per minute exiting the control area, and is proposed to be replaced with the automatic fare control turnstiles, which will accommodate 108 persons per minute entering, which is 40 persons per minute over the existing, and 172 persons per minute exiting, which is 28 persons per minute over the existing. Control area R204B, located at the southern portion of the southbound platform, right here, has 3 heats, which accommodate 51 persons per minute entering and 108 persons per minute exiting the control area. These will be replaced also with the automatic fare control turnstiles, which will accommodate 81 persons per minute entering, which is 30 persons per minute over existing, and 129 persons per minute exiting, which is 21 persons per minute over existing. The Wall Street Station is a high-volume station, and these proposed improvements will reduce the time it takes for passengers to leave the station after discharging the train, which is a goal of MTA and New York City Transit. The idea is to improve pedestrian control and flow, is to get people off the station and off the platform as quickly as possible after discharging from the train. And in addition to making these changes in the replacements of the turnstiles, New York City Transit has requested that as a part of this work, the control area railings be removed and replaced with ones that are more consistent with the main control areas, which reflect the historic nature of the station. In order to facilitate the proposed development, the applicant requests a special permit pursuant to Section 91251 to receive a 3 FAR bonus of approximately 71,000 square feet, in conjunction with subway station improvements consisting of new elevators providing ADA access to Broad Street Station and the replacement of fare arrays at the Wall Street Station. Thank you.
you, Sarah. Questions? Commissioner Edie.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure I understand. So obviously, these improvements are not within the footprint of the building that's being proposed.
Correct.
However, I'm assuming the developer of the building will be paying for these improvements?
That is correct.
And how about the maintenance of them thereafter?
From what I understand, they're going to be paying into a maintenance fund to the MTA, which is what MTA has requested in lieu of. So the two options would be either paying into the maintenance fund or to just pay the maintenance as it goes. But MTA tends to prefer to pay into a fund so that they can have control and consistency over repairs.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
Other questions?
I have one.
Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. We are being asked to evaluate the benefits to the city as part of our deliberation, and I feel wholly inadequate in being able to evaluate the benefits because we've just heard where the transferable development air rights were of a certain range, several neighborhoods up in West Chelsea, and I, for one, have no idea if this is commensurate benefit to the city. How is that determined? How can you help us figure out if we're doing our jobs properly?
Sure. Well, there is a history of previous subway improvement bonuses that have occurred. I mean, they are, I'm sure as you know, they are not a very frequent special permit that has gone on. The most recent was 1 Vanderbilt, which was kind of a little bit different, and then 15 Penn was before that, also similarly different, and that was in 2010. And before that, there was a part of the Long Island City developments. But essentially, it's more of just kind of like looking at what past improvements have been and like looking at the amount of square footage, like comparable, like to see what has been granted in the past. And I'm happy to provide the report that has everything kind of laid out of all the past subway improvement bonuses.
Do they have dollars associated with these improvements?
So it's not based on monetary value, it's based on public value. I know that like as a part of the East Midtown rezoning, they did include a monetary element to the subway improvement bonuses to make it more of an as-of-right type of, like not less discretionary action. And the monetary value for this improvement does kind of match what is in the East Midtown, which is also kind of used as a base, even though it was before it was approved. We kind of used briefly as a model. But typically for these monetary, like there's no monetary attachment.
It just feels entirely subjective in a way that makes me uncomfortable, and I hope you can give us more adequate backup so that we can make the determination this is, in fact, very clearly what our responsibility is.
Sure. I'm happy to provide the history on subway improvement bonuses.
So the negotiation in this case was purely between the developer and the MTA?
No, we were a part of it as well. There was a discussion, and there has been discussions for many months, and I mean, I think we all came to a consensus that we thought that this was acceptable.
Based on?
Based on looking at past precedents and using the East Midtown rezoning as a model for the amount of money that it costs to do the development, or to the improvements, excuse me.
Commissioner Levin?
Sarah, what's the jurisdiction of the LPC or what's the reach of the LPC approval that you mentioned that they have?
It's just to be able to build into the street bed because it's an individual landmark. It's a lot of the street network down in that area is an individual landmark. So in order to bring the elevators into the street, they have to have the LPC approval. So it's just.
Does it cover the kiosk design? I believe you said that the kiosks are a standard MTA design.
It is, and it did not approve like the design of the kiosk. That's just a standard design that MTA has, and it's been previously approved by PDC.
Okay, but this is a historic district location and a particularly complex public realm with all the security and all the history. Are we going to get into kiosk design at all, or do we just have to accept that this is the way MTA kiosks are designed?
From what I understand, and I can double check, that it's not within our jurisdiction to opine on the design of the station improvements. That's kind of left to New York City Transit and MTA.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner De La Hoz.
So following up on Commissioner Efron's questions, I'm just wondering if, it seems as though that in this case, that I would imagine that a significant amount is going to be contributed into the maintenance fund. And I'm just wondering if it's typical in the maintenance fund for the maintenance to go beyond the exact locations that are specified under the actions? Like, is it broad, much broader than the,
I'm
J
not.
and Z and 4 and 5 lines? for
I'm
instance?
not sure, but I can check with the MTA and New York City Transit to see
Okay.
if that goes into the larger fund or if it's dedicated to
Okay.
those cases.
I personally don't have an opinion. I'd just be happy to understand.
Mhm.
And I guess the other point on that, if it is broader, I'm wondering if the language about our actions has to be broader. So.
Other questions? It's certified. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 4 on page 154 of your package is 601 West 29th Street, a zoning map and text changes, and a transfer of floor area within the Special Hudson River Park District. Sylvia Lee of the Manhattan office will present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I will be giving 2 presentations on 2 separate sets of private applications located adjacent to one another, seeking similar actions related to Special Hudson River Park District to transfer floor area from areas within the park. As shown on this cover slide, the 2 sites are both located on Manhattan Block 675, bounded by West 29th Street, West 30th Street, 11th Avenue, and 12th Avenue in Manhattan Community District 4. I'll present the proposed actions and projects on 601 West 29th Street. First, the larger L-shaped site that fronts on West 29th Street, 11th Avenue, and West 30th Street, and then the proposal for 606 West 30th Street, the smaller site. A little bit of background on these applications as a brief reminder to the Commission. In 2013, state legislature adopted an amendment to the Hudson River Park District to allow Hudson River Park Trust to sell unused development rights to sites within 1 block of the park's boundary to the extent permitted by the zoning resolution. In 2016, propelled by the urgent needs to fund repairs on Pier 40, the city adopted a zoning change to establish the Special Hudson River Park District in the zoning resolution and simultaneously approved a set of private applications pursuant to the special district provisions to allow the transfer of development rights from Pier 40 to 550 Washington Street. As adopted, the special district only includes Pier 40 as the only granting site and 550 Washington Street as the only receiving site. It's anticipated at the time that moving forward to transfer additional floor area from other areas within Hudson River Park to new receiving sites, the special district boundary would be amended to include those new sites. Sites on Block 675 have been identified as potential new receiving sites for unused development rights on Piers 59, 60, and 61, and their associated head houses, which is also known as portions of Chelsea Piers, through private applications incrementally. The Commission may recall that earlier this year, in anticipation of upcoming private land use applications on the block, I presented the department's planning framework for the entire block, which recommends the allowance of residential use, inclusion in the special district, additional density, uses and build forms that complement the High Line and the surrounding area, as well as coordination with the Hudson Tunnel construction. 601 West 29th Street and 606 West 30th Street are the first 2 sites on the block, moving forward with proposals largely consistent with those recommendations. The third site, Lot 1, which is located towards the western end of the block, owned by Georgetown, is not part of the 2 applications currently being considered by the Commission. Now I'll move on to present the proposed actions and development on the larger one of the 2 sites. The applicant, Douglaston Development, seeks a zoning text amendment, a zoning map amendment, a special permit pursuant to the special Hudson River Park District regulations to facilitate the development of a 12 FAR mixed-use development on property located at 601 West 29th Street in Chelsea, Manhattan Community District 4. The requested actions in aggregate will include portions of Chelsea Piers as a new granting site and the development site as a new receiving site in the special Hudson River Park District. They will also rezone the receiving site from M23 to C64X district to permit a wider range of uses and higher density. It will also require mandatory inclusionary housing on the development site, allow the proposed development to utilize unused development rights transferred from Chelsea Piers to support improvements and maintenance of Hudson River Park, and lastly, allow certain bulk waivers on the development site for an improved site plan. Areas to be affected by the proposed actions include the granting site in Hudson River Park and the receiving site, which is also the development site. The Hudson River Park Trust has identified Piers 59, 60, and 61, as well as their associated pet houses, as the new granting site. Specifically, the granting site, as shown on the area map, is bounded by the northern boundary of tax lot 19 to the north, the pier headline to the west, the southern boundary of tax lot 11 to the south, and eastern facades of the head houses to the east. The site is located roughly between West 17th Street and West 22nd Streets. Here are some photos of the granting site. Originally used as a terminal for large ocean liners, the granting site is also known as Chelsea Piers and currently contains sports and recreational facilities, movie and television studios, as well as eating and drinking establishments. It also serves as a dock for recreational watercraft. Here's an area map for the receiving site. The site is located on the eastern portion of Block 675 with frontages along West 29th Street, 11th Avenue, and a small portion of West 30th Street. It is immediately south of the western rail yards of Hudson Yards and west of West Chelsea neighborhood. Along the north side of West 30th Street, the High Line runs through the West Chelsea neighborhood along the north side of West 30th Street. There's the High Line before curving northwards at the corner of 12th Avenue. The project site and block south of the site is Zone M23, which permits limited commercial and manufacturing uses up to 2 FAR. As proposed, it will be rezoned to C64X district, which permits a maximum of 12 FAR, including floor area transferred from Hudson River Park. The northwestern portion of the block adjacent to the project site is known as M16, where commercial and light manufacturing uses are permitted up to 10 FAR. Con Ed owns and occupies this block immediately south of the block. West Chelsea Historic District is further south, includes the Lee Hyatt Building and the terminal stores. The development site sits at the juncture of West Chelsea and Hudson Yards neighborhood, adjoins different neighborhood contexts, where a variety of uses and build forms are present or in construction. While the area surrounding the block historically contained warehousing and industrial uses, in recent years, the area has transitioned towards mixed use. With the development of in Hudson Yards and growth in West Chelsea, the surrounding area will continue to gain new buildings and open space, new residents, as well as additional commercial and recreational activities. Here are some photos of the development site. Along West 29th Street, there's an easement by Port Authority currently used for surface parking, a 2-story sanitation garage, office worker lounge. At the corner of West 29th Street and 11th Avenue, artist Jeff Koons' studio and Center for Operations. And at the corner of 11th Avenue and West 30th Street, a mobile gas station. The development site measures close to 62,000 square feet. As currently proposed, the project will include a total of 12 FAR in a 62-story, predominantly residential building. The building would include up to about 990 dwelling units, 25% of the residential floor area, up to 230 units would be set aside for permanent affordable housing pursuant to MIH Option 1. The building will also house commercial retail uses, amenities for residents, and an as-of-right parking garage. The applicant is also in conversation with FDNY and DCAS to explore the potential opportunity to host an EMS facility in the proposed building. The proposed project will transfer over 123,000 square feet of development rights, which is 2 FAR from the granting site. Here's the proposed site plan. The residential space will be accessed from a lobby at the corner of West 29th Street and 11th Avenue. Retail space will be accessed along 11th Avenue, across the street, as well as West 30th Street, across the street from Highland entrance. Accessory parking spaces will be accessed from West 29th Street. Residential tower component of the project will sit on an 85-foot base and is comprised of a high-rise portion along 11th Avenue, rising up to a height of 660 feet, and a mid-rise portion along West 29th Street up to a height about 400 feet. Parking will be located in a one-story structure mid-block along West 29th Street. Note that the western end of this portion of the site may also be temporarily occupied by the Hudson Tunnel project for staging purposes during tunnel construction. Rooftop of the lower-rise portion of the building would be improved with terraces for building tenants. Shown here is a rendering of the building base at the corner of 11th Avenue and West 29th Street. Residential lobby, 85-foot height building base with retail uses and amenity space, the one-story parking structure. The applicant is contemplating 3 alternative ground floor layouts, one with larger parking garage, one with additional retail on West 29th Street, and a third with an EMS facility at the western tail end of the site, subject to future actions by FDNY and DCAS if the site is ultimately deemed desirable. To facilitate a superior site plan and improved build form, the applicant is also seeking a number of bulk waivers. Specifically, the applicant seeks a waiver to allow a portion of the street wall on West 30th Street to rise to a height of 23 feet instead of 60 feet. The lower street wall will allow the provision of an open terrace immediately across the street from the High Line at approximately the same level. The applicant also seeks additional flexibility on street wall locations at the corner of 11th Avenue and West 29th Street to allow facade articulation of the residential lobby. A tower setback waiver is also being requested to allow the tower to set back by 5 feet instead of 15 feet along West 29th Street and 5 feet instead of 10 feet along 11th Avenue to allow sufficient floor plate depth. Lastly, the applicant seeks the tower lot coverage waiver below the minimum required 33% to allow a slimmer tower profile and a more desirable tower footprint. These axonometric diagrams also illustrate the location and extent of the bulk waivers. As stated in the statement submitted by the Hudson River Park Trust, the transfer of floor area to the project site is intended to provide funds for significant improvements to portions of the Hudson River Park within Community District 4. The trust plans to allocate 80% of the transfer proceeds to identified capital improvements and set aside 20% as a reserve for future capital maintenance needs of park improvements. The trust will has provided a map showing the location of the improvement options, which include upgrades to Chelsea Water Park, restoration of the historic float bridge at Pier 66A, construction of a new park area in the upland area north of Block 675, construction of Esplanade in the upland area between Piers 79 and 84, construction of an upland park adjacent to Pier 97, completion of Pier 97 as a public recreation pier, and improvements to pedestrian platform and upland area between West 59th and between West 58th and 59th Streets. The trust has begun a consultation process with CB4 to identify and prioritize these potential projects. Prior to the Commission's public hearing for the proposed development, the trust will provide the Commission with an updated statement that identifies which specific projects will be funded with a combination of transfer proceeds and other funding resources. In sum, to facilitate the proposed development and improvements to Hudson River Park, the applicant seeks the zoning text amendment to include new granting site and receiving site in the special district and map MIH area, a zoning map amendment to map the special district on new sites and rezone the development site to allow for a wider range of uses and additional density, and a special permit to transfer floor area from Chelsea Piers and allow certain bulk waivers. As a reminder, the slide outlines the special permit conditions and findings, which are principally related to design of the building and site plan of the proposed development, as well as the appropriateness of the floor area transfer in relation to park improvements. As the Commission may recall, pursuant to the special district regulations, absent the grant and election of this special permit to transfer development rights, the development site will continue to be governed by the former zoning, M23, and the additional density and residential use permitted by the new C64X zoning will not be unlocked. That's it for this presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sylvia. I do have a couple of questions. Number one, with regard to the commercial office space that's there on the site now, and that contains industrial or commercial and arts production of some kind. How many jobs? And number two, is there any plans for relocation being facilitated by the developer or anyone else?
In terms of number of jobs, I can get back to you. I know that the DEIS analyzes socioeconomic conditions affected by the proposed actions and also analyze potential displacement, so I'll provide more information on that as a follow-up. In terms of relocation, the Jeff Koons Art Studio has already planned to relocate elsewhere in Manhattan. And to our knowledge, the sanitation workers lounge is a low-intensity use by the sanitation, and they are looking to relocate in October 2018 to some temporary structures on the east side of Manhattan, since these trucks do serve on the east side of Manhattan primarily.
So there's no issue, this is not contingent on them finding another location. They're going to vacate this, whether they find an alternate location or not?
According to Department of Sanitation, they will relocate in October 2018 into those temporary facilities until a more permanent home will be found for these trucks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner De La Ruz.
I just wanted to follow up on the potential EMS facility, Sylvia. If I recall, and it may be that we approved some EMS uses or maybe ambulance underneath an elevated rail a while ago. Is that part of what this facility might serve in the end?
So I think the facility that you're referring to is underneath the High Line on West 23rd Street. One of the reasons why FDNY and DCAS are looking for an alternative location is to see the ability to relocate that facility elsewhere. And so this is one of the potential sites that they're looking at.
Okay. And would that would include potentially then the relocation of those ambulances, I guess, looking at into the parking spaces that they also have?
Yeah.
Okay, and when this comes back to us, will we know where that is?
So the applicant is in active conversation with an FDNY and DCAS, and we are also coordinating with the agencies, and the expectations is that we'll know a little bit more by the time this comes back for hearing and have more clarity before the final approvals. Okay.
And if I may, one more. And do we know on the 230 affordable units, what's the target AMI?
The applicant is not seeking any HPD funding, so the intention is to work out the details with HPD pursuant to MIH option 1.
Option 1.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, Sylvia, thank you for all of this and for a very clear presentation. You know, it's obvious, this is obviously an important site as a transition area between the rail yards to the north and West Chelsea to the south. Are there any current plans for, and the western rail yards, we know that those are going to be the biggest buildings anybody has ever seen in Manhattan. Is there any current planning going on for the blocks to the south?
The site occupied by Con Ed?
Well, you know, the whole stretch of West Chelsea that was left out of the High Line rezoning, but that is, you know, industrial land, you know, arguably, potentially looking for future rezoning.
As far as I know, the department is not contemplating a rezoning for this entire area at this time. And based on our conversation with Con Ed specifically, their intention is to keep occupying the site, and there may be potential to intensify the use of the site for other additional Con Ed uses.
Oh, okay. And then if I may, a couple of other questions. I'm interested in, first off, I note in passing that the proposal here is just to use as of right parking. And the last time we saw a Hudson Yards transfer, we were being told that 900 parking spaces were absolutely essential to making the thing happen. So it's nice to find a developer who doesn't seem to think that parking is the most important aspect of a project. I'm interested in, because these are such, both of these will be, you know, large, important, significant buildings, what measures they're taking to be the lightest on the land possible, the most resilient, the most sustainable, putting off the fewest greenhouse gas emissions. The way I put the question suggests that I don't even know how to articulate it.
Right.
But, you know, in a world of rapidly rising attention to climate change measures, it would be good for us to know that these buildings have been designed to be the best they possibly can be. That's not a condition of this special permit in the way that it was for One Vanderbilt, but I think it's, do they have their eye on this?
I think the applicant teams are here, and they should get ready to answer those questions by the time it comes up to the commission. I know that those aspects of the project, including flood resiliency and greenhouse gas emissions, are analyzed in the EIS. So I can look into those chapters, see if there's any. As far as I know, the projects are consistent with the city's waterfront policy.
And then one more relating to the environmental impacts. I note there are a number of impacts identified in the EAS, but one of them is childcare facilities.
Right.
And there are a number of experienced childcare operators in this area, and I think this commission is having a crash course on the importance of citing childcare facilities in new buildings, and I'm wondering if there's been any discussion with either of these applicants about finding space for a childcare facility on this block, especially considering it's going to be across the street from the new school on the Western Rail Yards.
Right. So currently, neither project includes on-site additional childcare facilities, and the DEIS does go into it a little bit more, but based on the department's understanding of the provision of both public and private childcare and the availability of childcare facilities not only surrounding these project sites, but also available to people residing in these buildings, but the childcare facilities near their workplace. So given a combination of factors, I believe that the projects are not identifying new childcare facilities, sites for new childcare facilities to mitigate impacts in this area, but will provide a little bit more information between draft and final.
Thanks. Just to follow up on that, the opportunity for retail on the 29th Street side, it just seems like it's calling out for community use, just as an alternative, given that no one knows what's going to be on the Con Edison side, and if it is in fact Con Edison. Just to build on that, I don't know if the applicant has considered that, but it seems like something that perhaps should be considered.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. I note that, further in the documents, there's a mention that the developer's paying $37 million for the 124 or 123,000 square feet. How does this compare to St. John's? And, how we just saw sort of evaluation. I'm curious how these air rights are evaluated, and how do we ensure that, the park is in fact receiving a fair deal?
So thanks for the question. Appraisals for air rights transfer for both to this project and to the next project we're talking about have been conducted to help the trust determine the amount of transfer proceeds and the extent to which park improvement projects could be funded through the transfer. So compared to 550 Washington Street, obviously the amount of floor area transferred here is less
I'm looking
than,
for per square foot comparison.
So Hudson River Park Trust will be able to provide, speak to the specifics of the appraisals. My understanding is that the per square foot of these two projects is in the ballpark of $300 to $330 per square foot, comparable to the evaluation of 550 Washington's air rights.
Thank you.
Other questions? Certified.
Item number 5 is the sister application to this at 606 West 30th Street.
Yeah. This one will be shorter. Similar to the previous project, the applicant Lazarian Properties seeks a zoning text amendment, a zoning map amendment, and a special permit pursuant to the special Hudson River Park District regulations to facilitate the development of a 12 FAR mixed-use building on property located at 606 West 30th Street in Chelsea, Manhattan Community District 4. The requested actions in aggregate would include the same granting site, Chelsea Piers, into the special district, and the development site as a new receiving site in the special Hudson River Park District. Actions will also rezone the receiving site from M23 to C64X district, require mandatory inclusionary housing on the development site, allow the proposed development to utilize air rights transferred from Chelsea Piers to support the same set of improvements, and lastly, allow some bulk waivers on the development site for an improved site plan. Area map for the granting site, the same as the previous project. This receiving site, 2 lots that front on West 30th Street, directly across the street from the High Line. So that includes the development site, outlined here in the red dash line, and a small out parcel next to it. Both sites are currently located in an M23 district and are proposed to be rezoned to C64X and included in the special district. Shown here are the development site, which is improved with a 1-story sanitation garage, leased to the SNY, used for vehicle maintenance. You can also see the out parcel here, occupied by a 1-story auto repair store. Noted that even though the out parcel will be included in the rezoning action, no development is proposed and no floor area from the park would be transferred to this out parcel. So as noted earlier, this means that the former zoning M23 would still apply, and we don't anticipate any changes to this parcel at this time. As currently designed, the proposed development is a 36-story mixed-use residential commercial building that rises to about 520 feet in height. The building will have a total of 12 FAR, including over 200 residential units and a little over 13,000 square feet of commercial floor area in the building base, and will provide affordable housing pursuant to MIH, so either option 1 or option 2. The proposed development will also include approximately 47 as-of-right accessory parking garage spaces. The proposed project will transfer close to 30,000 square feet of development rights, which is 2 FAR, from the granting site. The development site has a lot area of just short of 15,000 square feet with a frontage along West 30th Street, across the street from the High Line, of 150 feet and a depth of about 100 feet. The residential tower component outlined here in blue sits on a 3-story commercial base. As currently designed, the ground floor will include retail spaces, shaded in red, residential lobby in yellow, and the entrance of a parking garage to the western end of the site. The western retail space will include a staircase, an elevator leading up to the 2nd and 3rd floor retail spaces, which is anticipated to be a single establishment and occupied by a restaurant. The 2nd floor retail space is proposed to have a depth of 30 feet along most of the frontage at the level of the High Line. Parking will be tucked behind the retail space and accessed by parking lifts from the 1st floor. The 3rd floor will house the main portion of the anticipated restaurant retail use, which extends outdoors to the terrace that wraps around the floor plate. Residential units as well as amenity space will be located above the 3rd floor. To facilitate a superior site plan and improved build form, the applicant is also seeking a number of bulk waivers. First, the applicant seeks a tower lot coverage of 47%, exceeding the permitted maximum 45% to allow more desirable tower footprint, and the provision of side balconies on the upper floors. In addition, the applicant seeks a waiver to allow the street wall on West 30th Street to rise to a height of 45 feet instead of 60 feet, and a front setback waiver to allow the provision of an open terrace and balcony. To allow the provision of a balcony on the 4th floor. These 2 waivers will allow the provision of an open terrace connected to the restaurant and the balcony, which will contribute to the activation of the building facade facing the High Line. To allow sufficient retail depth on the 2nd floor along West 30th Street, the applicant is also seeking, is also seeking a rear yard waiver to allow parking to be pushed back all the way to the rear lot line. The rear yard waiver also allows the provision of a balcony, the rear connected to the 4th floor residential use. Here are some additional renderings of the proposed development. As previously mentioned, the transfer of development rights from the granting site to the project site will contribute to the same set of potential improvements of Hudson River Park within Community District 4, which will be narrowed down based on HRPT's discussion with CB4. In sum, in order to facilitate the proposed development and improvements to Hudson River Park, the applicant seeks a zoning tax amendment, map amendment, and special permit to allow transfer of floor area from Chelsea Piers, as well as facilitate contribution to the park. That's it for this application. Happy to answer any additional questions.
Thank you. Questions? Commissioner Levin.
What's the idea with the niche in the middle of the
We're seeing a lot of
north
those today.
elevation of the building?
Oh,
This
green niche.
this little, it looks like a soap dish, but in a tile shower, but I hesitate to say that to a.
We have a lot of invitations.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for your comment. I'll let the project architects to
Don't
speak
call
to the
it a
design.
soap dish, okay?
The design.
It's a big bar of soap.
When it comes back to the commission, but functionally speaking, this will be a green wall that is interior and connected to the 2 amenity floors in the building. And there will be an outdoor terrace screened by a glass wall outside of kind of connecting the 2 portions of the floor plate.
While we're on the question of design, though, I think we all eagerly anticipate this coming back and having a full proposal. Will the buildings attach to each other?
No. You mean the 2 developments? Because of the existence of the out parcel, which we expect
Oh,
to
so there's
remain.
still space.
Yeah, so
Okay.
there is a space in between.
Thank you.
But the buildings do touch, I believe, in the rear.
Okay, other questions? Commissioner De La Luz.
It would be helpful to know when it comes back, you know, what they've been considering in terms of option 1 over option 2 for MIA.
Other questions? Thank you, certified.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 8, 1220 Avenue P rezoning has been withdrawn by the applicant. We have some council modifications. Items number 9 and 11, the Special Harlem River Waterfront District and East River 50's text amendment has been tabled to Wednesday. We have the proposed council modification on 723 to 733 Myrtle Avenue rezoning, and Anthony Grande of the Brooklyn office will tell us about the council proposal.
Good afternoon. This is a council modification to a private application, 723, 733, Myrtle Avenue rezoning. I'll just briefly go over the commission-approved zoning and then the council modified. The commission,
Anthony, wait just
yes.
a moment. Okay. Proceed, thank you.
The commission-approved zoning, as you can see here, is an R7D C24 district on the north side of Myrtle Avenue, and then on the south side of Myrtle Avenue, an R6A C24. I underlined the A because that's the council modification. So on the next slide, we see that south of Myrtle Avenue, it would be an R6B, still with the C24. The R6B with MIH allows 2.2 FAR and a 5-story maximum height. I'll also point out that the council modification removes option 2 from the MIH map, leaving only option 1. The proposed modifications are within scope and require no further land use or environmental review. Thanks.
Okay, so, show of hands, do we accept the? Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is future votes. 116 Bedford Avenue had originally been scheduled to vote on November 29th. This is being laid over to December 13th. It's for a zoning change to establish new commercial use on the ground floor of an existing building. On November 29th, staff has prepared favorable reports on the following applications. 587 Bergen Street to facilitate the construction of a 4-story residential building with affordable housing. 425 Grand Concourse to facilitate the construction of a 27-story mixed-use building with affordable housing. And the proposed landmarking of the Salvation Army headquarters on 14th Street in Manhattan. On December 13th, staff will prepare a favorable report for the Ubity House landmark, which is a landmark designation for a single-family residence in Brooklyn. You have a briefing package on page 279 of your package. We have post-hearing follow-ups for the acquisitions of the existing daycare centers in Brooklyn that were heard on November 14th. The Shirley Chisholm Childhood Education Center, the Shirley Chisholm Daycare Center, the Friends of Crown Heights 2 Daycare Center, All My Children Daycare Center, and the Iola Jordan Daycare Center in the Bronx.
Okay, is that now or?
That's, those are, will be scheduled for vote on December 13th. The post-hearing follow.
Okay.
We were going to keep one of those separate, right? Based on the hearing, we're gonna- three were.
Iola Jordan, yes.
Okay, I couldn't remember the name. Thank you.
It's the daycare center that's in the Bronx.
Great, thank you.
Okay,
May I say something?
please.
I've been reading this one to death, but I really don't have a sense whether there's any potential for change in policy about sprinklers, particularly when there are wholesale renovations of daycare centers. And while we touched on it in the hearing, I wonder if there could be some follow-up about that. Again, I understand that building code is building code, but
Policy.
the policy around whether or not there should be sprinklers when there's a huge, massive renovation for a long-term lease seems like something at least we should consider.
Could we hear from the Department of Buildings on that?
We can reach out to DCAS and the Department of Buildings and discuss that at the next public hearing, the daycare center, the next daycare center that comes back.
Well, I feel like we've postponed this question a considerable number of times, and I'm just wondering what we can do about these three that seem like they have massive renovations going on.
Mm-hmm. Right, just becomes a point of negotiation between the owner and DCAS at that point. Really.
And they happen to be single-purpose buildings. There aren't other tenants they'd be disturbing. I just wonder.
We will reach out to DCAS and see if we get a response in writing.
Thank you.
On how they feel about sprinklers. Unfortunately, the code is against us here as it's currently developed. But we'll see if we could, since there are some renovations and some money being put into the building, what the cost would be to do the sprinkler system, whether that's manageable.
Great. And again, I know that some of the decisions being made are design and just seem to be discretionary, and this one just seems like it's a really critical one when possible to do.
Okay.
Commissioner Money and then Commissioner Levin.
I'd just like to stress the fact that this is not, we talked about this at the hearing, this is not a Department of Buildings issue anymore. This is now a policy decision that needs to be rendered by either DCAS or the mayor to identify the fact that if we have young adults, young children, excuse me, not even adults, in a renovated space, that we're mandating that sprinklers be put in, regardless of what code says. So it's not a DOB issue, it's a policy issue, and it's one that really it merits discussion and consideration. And Commissioner Efron is entirely correct. We're giving here a 10-year lease, and it's a long period of time. So there should be some kind of consideration on a policy decision going forward in terms of all these child care centers that we're approving that do not have sprinklers.
Staff will absolutely relay your concerns to DCAS and try to get a response in writing that we will be able to distribute to you in your next package.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Levin, did you have something?
Well, I was essentially going to say the same thing, but by way of saying, as I understand it, the rules do require sprinklers for one age group, but not for another. And why should there be any difference based on the age of the children? If they're good for one age group, they should be good for both.
Yeah.
And I'll also point out, if you'll permit me, Chair, that if this were a lease in a new building, it would have sprinklers.
Yeah.
Got it.
It's that distinction that Commissioner Levin pointed out, which is why I at least wanted to have that question go to DOB. But solid points all, and I trust
Hear you, got it.
response from DCAS.
Sorry.
Anyone else on this?
We just confirmed that everything on Wednesday for the hearing? All here? No change? Remind me now. I came in a few minutes late.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
I'm just confirming all the details for Wednesday's public hearing. Right here.
Here,
Okay.
10 a.m.
Bring your lunch.
And then much.
And was there another alternative location? I didn't hear about it. I didn't know about that. Do we have any other business? Sir?
No, Vice Chairman, I believe we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.